Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I have a summery all over hibiscus background card featuring flick style coloring with Copic markers and Polychromos colored pencils by Faber-Castell. I'm also working with a new stamp set from Simon Says Stamp called Hibiscus Blooms. It's a brand new set, it just released today. So here's a look at this set. It's a gorgeous 6x8 clear stamp set. You have one large hibiscus cluster as well as individual images to allow you to create any sort of arrangement you want. There are also several sentiments and sub-sentiments included in this set. So basically, this is an all-in-one stamp set, meaning you can use just this one set to create beautiful cards. If you are just starting making cards, if you're new to card making, and if you don't have a lot of supplies, this stamp set is a good one to have as it gives you everything you need to start making cards right away. Here's a look at a card I already made using the hibiscus cluster from here. I simply colored my hibiscus flowers pink and yellow, and then I added some tone-on-tone stamping in the background using a watermark ink to create a backdrop for the flowers. It's a simple card, and it's a good example of how you can use this stamp set to easily make beautiful cards. The set also has coordinating dies, and I encourage you to get those as well, as they not only include dies for the flowers and leaves and for that hibiscus cluster, but also for the sentiments. I love to have coordinating dies for my sentiment stamps as they really add a nice finished touch to the card. I'm going to start by stamping the images that I need for my card. My plan is to create a background covered with hibiscus flowers and leaves. I'm making an A2 card, and usually that means I need to stamp 2 A2 card front sheets worth of images. So here I have a panel of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so the size of an A2 card, and I'm going to stamp the images onto this panel and another panel of the same size in Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I will be coloring these images with Copic markers, and this particular ink is Copic marker friendly. Here are the 2 panels that I stamped. I should have enough images for the card idea that I have in mind. Now comes the coloring part. Super fun. I'm going to use the flick style coloring method, meaning I'm not going to blend the colors of the markers that I'm using. Instead, I'm going to flick the color onto the image, resulting in visible lines and visible brush strokes. There isn't a right or a wrong way to do flick style coloring. I just do what works for me. Sometimes I like to start from the lightest color and move to the darkest. Sometimes I do it the opposite way. Today I'm doing it the opposite way. So here I've started with the darkest color, YG67, and I flick the color onto the section of the leaf I imagine to be the darkest. You can see visible brush strokes when I apply the marker. I'm holding the marker rather lightly, and I barely touch the tip of the marker to the paper with quick brush stroke-like movement to apply flicks. Next, I add my medium color, YG17, and again, I flick it onto the leaf, extending the color further into the image. Next comes my lightest color, YG03, and again, I'm flicking it onto the leaf, extending it further. So you can see I have 3 green colors, but they're all distinctly different. The YG67 is very dark. The YG17 is nice medium green, and YG03 is nice light green. Now I still have some white areas left on the image, and while I do want to preserve some of that white as it will make for a nice highlight, I feel there's just too much white at this time, so I need to add a little bit more color. I can do that with another very light green marker, YG01. Again, I flick it onto the leaf, coloring most of that white. Next, I like to go back to my darkest colors and reapply them to intensify the shadows on the image. You can also intensify the shadows and add details using pencils. A pencil can be sharpened to a very fine tip, and it will add beautiful fine detail to your coloring. I didn't add any pencil detail to the leaves, but I did add a lot to the flowers, and you'll see that in a minute. To color the flowers, I picked several red and pink markers. For the red colors, I used R89 as my darkest, R39 as dark medium, R27 as the medium, and R24 as the lightest color. Now, it's important to pick the right colors for this technique. You need to make sure that there is a clear difference between the colors you're using. You need to have colors that are not too close together, otherwise the flicks won't be too visible. I will show you how I colored one of the petals, and that's how my coloring went. I colored a petal at a time. I first applied the darkest color following the shape of the petal. I added my darkest to the base of the petal, as well as to any of the petal folds indicated by the black stamped lines. Next, I applied R39 color, extending it further down into the flower petal. Next came in the R27. This is the main color of this flower, and this color was extended even further into the petal, coloring it about 80%. Finally, I applied R24, the lightest red, leaving just a touch of white. And you can see how well the white blends into the petal, creating a beautiful highlight on the petal high point. Now, to add detail to the Copic coloring, I like to use Polychromos colored pencils by Faber-Castell. I have numerous videos on my YouTube channel showing how to color with these pencils from scratch, and I especially love to use them on dark backgrounds as they really help the image pop. But I find coloring with colored pencils a lot more labor-intensive and time-consuming compared to alcohol markers. Alcohol markers are a very fast way, to me, to apply color to any image. So I like Copics for the speed with which I can color or for the efficiency. But I also love my Polychromos pencils for the incredible detail I can add using them. So I've learned to combine the two coloring mediums, especially when I'm coloring flowers, when I want to add some petal details to my images. A sharp pencil is a must, as that gives you a beautiful thin line. Now, Polychromos complement the Copic markers beautifully, and you don't really need to worry about the type of paper you're coloring on when you're using Polychromos just to add detail. Here, I'm using the Simon Says stamp 120-pound cardstock. I love the smoothness of this paper for my Copic coloring, but this is not the best paper for Polychromos pencils, as because of that smoothness, the pencil doesn't have much to grab onto. But if I'm using just the pencil to add detail, I can get away with using non-specialty paper for my colored pencils. I used Y19 and YR14 to color the stem in yellow, and I also added some detail and shading using a red pencil. As for the pink flowers, I went with the RV09, RV06, RV10, and RV00 markers, and I colored the flowers in the same way, flicking the color onto the petals. I also added detail using some red and pink colored pencils. Now here, the RV10 and the RV00 are actually a good example of the two colors of markers you probably shouldn't use for this technique. The RV10 and the RV00 are very similar. You can barely tell the difference. So when you use these markers for the flick style coloring, you probably need to use just one, either the RV10 or the RV00. Coloring is time consuming, but I also find it relaxing and calming. It took me about 2 hours to color these two panels, but I quite enjoyed this process. I used coordinating dies and I cut the images out in my Platinum die cutting machine. With the images cut out, I worked on creating a background for my card. I clustered the flowers together, I added some leaves, and basically I built a background for this card using the images I made. I combined a large flower with a medium-sized flower and then a little bud, as well as several leaves. And I basically made 3 large clusters for my background. I used foam adhesive squares and I foam mounted my images onto the card. I love to add dimension to my projects as that helps to add shadows and that adds life to a card. I rarely go with one-layer cards. All of my projects need to have some sort of dimension. I trimmed the excess off using scissors, and I did save all of those tiny pieces and then used them to fill in any gaps around the edges of the card, and that really helped to finish the background. So here's what the panel looks like. I love the way it turned out, and all of the vibrant hibiscus flowers just scream tropical summer to me. To create a sentiment for this card, I used one from the Hibiscus Blooms stamp set, and I just heat embossed it, and it reads, "Missing You." So I stamped it in black ink in VersaFine Onyx Black, and I embossed it in clear embossing powder to add glossiness. I also die cut 4 blank pieces, so I die cut the sentiment and then 4 blank pieces, and I stuck them all together to add dimension to this piece so that it would stand out from the background. I also added a simple sub-sentiment, also from this stamp set, and I placed it below the main one. Lastly, I embellished the card front with gems from Spellbinders, and I used the almost white-like gems from the Crystal Gem Mix. So here's a look at the finished card that I have for you today, featuring the Hibiscus Blooms stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. There are lots more new products from Simon releasing today, some fabulous stamps, coordinating dies, stencils, and I encourage you to check them out. I have a link in the video description below. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.